everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today feels like spring, so I thought that it was the perfect day to film my second part of my spring book haul because I've bought quite a lot of books recently. So let's just get started. Spinster by Kate Bullock. I have been wanting this book for several years now. That's because it's about a woman who calls herself a spinster, even though that's a very old-fashioned word. And she writes about what it's like to live without a man, live without being married, and what kind of pressure that kind of puts on her based on the society that we all live in, where you are expected to be settled down and be a mother by this age. I'm looking very much forward to this one, especially because I can relate to her situation. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. I also finally decided to get these two books by Joan Campbell. So these will be my first two books of hers. These are the ones with quotes that weird things customers say in bookstores. And I think these are going to provide me with a great laugh and some surprises as well. I was curious to finally get these because I read the diary of a bookseller in which these are not mentioned, but it was kind of the same situation in which the writer tells us about some funny things customers say to him in bookstores. So yeah, I finally got these and I love how they are very tiny and very ready to jump into. And this was the book I was talking about just earlier. The next one is Nothing to Envy: Ordinary Lives in North Korea by Barbara Demick. And I wanted to read this after having finished In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. Let me just show you. I read this one in February, I believe, and was really intrigued to know more about North Korea. So I decided to go for this one, which is, as the title says, about ordinary lives in North Korea. As we all know, North Korea is a devastating country to live in, and it's always very educating to read about the people's perspective, even though they are not really allowed to say anything about how they live and what they feel about it. But here we have a book about that anyway. The Establishment and How They Get Away With It by Owen Jones. First of all, this cover, I love it. Second of all, I heard about this book through JeanBookishThoughts channel, which I will link down below. She talked about some of her favorite non-fictional books, and this was on the list. So this one is about how society is kind of corrupted in some parts and what is really wrong with how we have established things. And I think this is mainly about England, but it could also be read as just society in general. I'm not sure about that yet, but I will find out, and I am definitely intrigued to read this. It's one of those books that I think is going to be a little bit more on the heavy side, but I think it's also written with a humorous tone of voice, but I could be mistaken. Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates. This cover feels like spring to me, so I might pick this one up sooner rather than later. However, the topic is very heavy because it's about how women today experience sexism whenever they are on the subway or whenever they are social or at work in different places of their lives. I believe it's an account of different perspectives, different women who tell us about their experiences with sexism today. And I just found that topic pretty fascinating, so here we have the book. The last autumn, I read and loved The Glass Castle by Janet Waltz, so I decided to get another one of her books, which is this one, Halfbrick Houses, a true life novel. And I think this is another account of her childhood, which was very alternative, I will say. So, and that really interests me a lot. So I'm intrigued to read more by her. I know that she writes really good non-fiction, and this is one, when I was told about it, I immediately had to go order it because Janet Waltz is just a brilliant author, and I'm very excited about this one, which goes obviously for all of the books. I promise there is some fiction in this bunch, but let's just continue in the non-fiction genre. I have here Educated by Tara Westover. Is that how it's pronounced? I don't know. This one is another one of those accounts of a childhood that is very alternative, because it's about Tara, who grew up in a family that believed that the world would end at some point, and they prepared for that throughout her childhood. So she didn't get to meet any boys. She was told that one day all men would disappear from Earth, I believe. I'm not sure yet. And she was very restrained in her upbringing, so that she couldn't date, she couldn't really go to a normal school, I believe, and she just received a different education from what we are used to. This sounds super intriguing to me, and it's one that I've really had to read, at least get and then read very soon. You know what it is like with these gigantic TBRs, that you have so many books you want to get to right now, but that's not always the case. Next book is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. This one is about a surgeon who is one day diagnosed with terminal cancer. So this is an account of his experience of first being the doctor, the surgeon, and then being the patient, and what that did to him, because he did die while writing this story. So the end of this book is actually written by his wife. It's one that I'm very intrigued by, and one that I have already put my bookmark into, because I plan on picking this one up next. It's also part of my Spring TBR list, so that's another reason why I want to read it right now. The next non-fiction is this one. I finally got my hands on this book, which I've had my eyes on also for several years. Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think you know this, but this is about racism in America. And that's all I know, but it's a subject that I want to educate myself in. Of course, I know about racism going on, but I want to hear from the perspective of a person who is living in this world. And I've heard phenomenal things about this book, so it's one that I had to get. Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham. I mean, Gilmore Girls, I loved it. Lauren Graham has written a book, I wanted to read it, and I believe this one gives us a backstage view on what it was like filming Gilmore Girls, but it's also about what happened from the show until the show they did 10 years later, which was a year in the life of Gilmore Girls. So I'm interested to read it. This is one that is going to be light and funny, I believe, and it's exactly what I'm in the mood for whenever it's spring, like outside, and also summer. I have two more non-fiction books, and then I will get to the fiction ones. First we have I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, another one of those books that is about racism, I think. But I have actually forgotten. I will find out. I will say though that I ordered the beautiful blue cover and I received this one, so that kind of bugs me a little bit. Also because this is the mass paperback one, which I'm not the hugest fan of. I love paperbacks, but I don't want for them to come in this small size, but I will read it anyway, obviously I will. And then the last non-fiction book is Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris. This is a funny story because I read a chapter from this book some years ago. I'm an English teacher, and a chapter from this book was used in one of the examination papers that I was using, and that got me intrigued because this is about being a foreigner in France and trying to learn to speak French, and how you feel so stupid not being able to talk the language, trying to cope with everything, not completely understanding the situations and what people are laughing about. It's about this feeling, and that sounds interesting to me, so here we have it. I hope the rest of the book is going to be as good as that chapter. And then I have 4 final books, which are all fiction. First we have Mohawk by Richard Russo. I love Richard Russo. I have read 3 others of his novels and loved them. So when I heard about this one through another book I read, I immediately had to get it because it sounded interesting. It's another one of those books that's about people living in America. It's about everyday life, and then there is some kind of intrigue going on, but it's very covered which I love how he writes these kinds of stories. So this is perfect. I'm definitely going to read it over the summer, I believe. And then the next 2 books are by the same author, but I'm not going to read this or these books during summer, I believe. I think I will save them for October, and that's because I have bought 2 books by Stephen King. I have here Misery, which has the most gorgeous cover, and then Carrie. Now, I was obviously interested to pick up some books of his when I read his non-fiction book about writing. He mentioned some of his works, obviously, and how he got started on writing, and this was his first published novel. I've never read it. I have watched the movie when I was a child, and that's it. But now I finally get to read the actual book. This one, I actually watched the movie while reading on writing of his, and it was so good. And then when I saw this in the bookstore, I immediately grabbed it, mainly because of the cover, but also I wanted to have the same story but in words, so that I could really get into the character of, what is she called? Misery? No, Annie Wilkes. Annie Wilkes is definitely one of the creepiest characters I've ever encountered, and I am so freaked out but also intrigued to read about her in novel form. The very last book is also one that I might save for autumn, and that is the last book in the Passage trilogy by Justin Cronin. This is The City of Mirrors. I have read The Passage. I am currently halfway through the second book, the 12th, and this one is pretty gigantic, but I mean to finish the series sometime this year. So now I have the book, and while I am reading the second book pretty slowly, I want to have this one to look forward to if I'm in the need for a conclusion right away. And if not, it's fine. I still have the book so that I can pick it up at some point this year, hopefully. And that is it for my second part of my spring book haul, and I believe this is it. I'm not going to buy any more books this spring, I hope, but I'm not making any promises. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, and if you've enjoyed them, please don't spoil them. And then until my next video, happy reading.